Welcome back, my friends, to the Sweet Spot, where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas. Wait a minute. There's not two of us, there's three. So we have Howard and Paul, but we also have a guest. So good morning, good afternoon to everybody.
Hey everybody.
Good morning.
And so who is our guest this week? Jeff, you want to? I think the audience at this point either knows us or is tired of us talking about ourselves. So why don't you give us a little intro?
Absolutely. So, hello, everybody. My name's Jeff Shupak. I am president of a company called Project and Team, and we help organizations scale lean, agile, and DevOps practices. Generally, those organizations are fairly large and are having challenges dealing with the complexity. And so we help them think a little bit differently.
What level of maturity is the sweet spot? Like, is it I'm level 3 and I need to get a level 5? I've never heard of DevOps. I need introduction. Or I've mastered the skill set and now I need to tweak it. What's the best place for you guys?
It's going to be fairly, I'd say it lands in probably 3 areas. All of, I would say, are pretty early on the whole Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm. I would say it's organizations that are highly regulated or compliance driven. So there's a lot of reasons why they can't just apply a practice that's been a success pattern for somebody else. A lot of them work across large geographies, and a lot are working in cyber physical, so hardware inclusive, where it's not as simple as feature flags or these sort of things. And so the question becomes, well, how do we get a bit creative with the intent to do that at scale? Specifically in the hardware domain, gets a little challenging. So I'd say they're all relatively new to getting into it, but understand the need to change.
Nice.
So I need to say something. I love the library and the ladder going up.
So I got a story behind the ladder. Always as a kid, I always wanted they're called Cotterman ladders, I guess. I always wanted a ladder. And so Borders Books a few years ago closed near us. And so I go down to Borders Books. I'm like, I wonder if I can get a ladder. They're like selling all the furniture and everything. And sure enough, they sold me a ladder and the rail that goes along it. And I absolutely love it. I still have a sign. I don't know if you can see it, but it says staff use only on it. It's literally as is from them. I did have to trim the top. I probably don't need a ladder, but I kind of need a ladder. So
did you
that's the story of the ladder? Like, absolutely. They didn't even know what price to put it at, Paul. I think I got it for like $10. They're like, well, just get out of our store. Stop asking for our furniture.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just wait outside at the in the garbage depot and they throw it out, grab it.
Right, it's exactly it. And so yeah, no, I love it. I feel complete.
So before we started recording, we kind of took a trip down memory lane, and I mentioned that our first ever podcast, which was audio only, we did in Tokyo, and we were staying at the Prince Hotel, which of course is a Marriott because we're Marriott people. And
Prince Sakura. Yep.
We were sitting in the little garden at a bench and kind of recorded. But we did something else that week. We went and visited the mouse, like we try to do whenever we're in a place that has such a thing. And that was like probably top 3 visits to the mouse in my entire life. So let me paint the picture. There's like, let's say 10 of us, and we're all middle-aged executives, nerds who've been around a long time, right? There's nobody that's new to what they do.
Grizzled veterans.
Sure. That wasn't where I was going. Kind of arrogant dicks. You know what I mean? Like we're all middle-aged. We're all very much kind of heads of household, you know? And so we're at Disneyland and nobody listens. There's no kind of group thought to it, right? And you'd be walking along and one of them would just go shiny and veer. And in any other park, that would be it. You just wouldn't see them again until the end of the day, right? I guess we'll meet you when we leave at park exit. I don't know how that's going to work. But because it's Tokyo and we're all Westerners, it was like, oh, crap, where did Jeff go? And then see people, small person. Oh, that's Jeff.
Especially since at least 80% of a park like that is groups of female students all in uniform, like groups of 30, and they're in clumps, right? So it's easy to tell a group of female students against anybody else in a crowd. It's always easy to find.
Yeah, but it was absolutely hilarious to take a trip through the park. You know what I mean? Like, oh crap! A member of our party just decided they didn't want to be a member of the party anymore and wandered away.
How different is
no problem
Tokyo Disney from Tokyo or Disney Paris or Disney World? I've never been to Tokyo Disney.
So it's interesting. Half of every ride is in English and half of every ride is in Japanese, with one exception. They have this Crunch experience or whatever, the turtle from
Turtle Talk with Crush.
Yeah, Turtle Talk with Crush, which I ended up somehow wandering into by myself. Right, I got to it before everybody else did. I ended up wandering in by myself, 100% in Japanese. There was no moment of it in English, not one single solitary thing. So I just sat there the entire time giggling. I had no idea what was going on. I was the only single adult in the room. Like, it was definitely skewed towards very young children. Supposed to be interactive. And of course, there I am, couldn't understand a single solitary word, sitting right in front.
The show, right? The show is a screen, and behind there's somebody with a voice who is Crush, who's interacting with the kids that are in front. The parents are sitting on the stools behind. The whole goal is to interact with the kids, right? But every so often they'll pick out an adult and ask questions of the adult. And I'm assuming Howard was unique in that room. Did they pick you out to ask you a question at all, or no? Did they make an assumption you weren't going to interact?
No, there was kind of a point and then some words, and then I just kind of looked around, and then they were gone. Right? I think there was an assumption that if I was brave enough to come in alone, I must have understood Japanese. It was, they just made an assumption, and their assumption was wildly incorrect. It wasn't even. It was the most uncomfortable I've ever been at a Disney park.
Right.
You know what I mean?
How did you find your way onto this ride, Howard?
Well,
I feel like it's
on a list, and so I'm like, I got separated for whatever reason, and they're like, I'm like, where are we going next? Oh, we're going to go to the Crunch ride. Okay, cool. I'll meet you there. And they just kind of get in line, figuring they'll find me because I'm easy to see. But I was so far ahead, I made it into the ride before the rest of the party showed up. So then I just kind of soloed it. So I bring that up because I was just at Orlando, right? I had a conference, and like I often do when I have a conference in Orlando, I asked my wife if she would like to go, and she says, absolutely, can we go to Disney? So we went out a couple days early. I took Paul's advice, and we went to Epcot, which was a fantastic experience. It's the least kind of populated of the parks. So if you're going on a busy day, it'll be the least busy at Epcot. So I think the longest line was maybe 70-ish minutes. But we didn't really stand in any of those. We did Ratatouille near the end of the day. I have to say, spectacular. And somehow, so Ratatouille is the longest. Ratatouille was 150 minutes for most of the day.
Because it's the newest, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, other than the one you were on. Yeah.
It was 35 minutes when we hit it.
Wow.
We finished dinner, and I was refreshing the Genie app. I didn't pay for anything. I just used their app and refreshed until it kept ticking down and ticking down and ticking down. I'm like, it's 30 minutes. We should go. We got in line before we made it into the kind of the building. We were in the line outside. It was at 70 minutes.
Huh.
Wow. So there was some other activity, parade or something that was happening that caused a lull, and we captured the kind of tip of that lull. And the ride was fantastic. We did Guardians of the Galaxy, which is very hard to get into. It's a queue only line, so you have to do a virtual queue. You can join it at 7:30, but for some reason I wasn't eligible to join at 7:30. Or you can join at 1 p.m. and I got in at 1 p.m. and then you show up at your appropriate time. They let you in through the fast pass, and then it's still a 60-minute wait or something. But it's effectively if somebody said, if you just, I want you to think about what you would do with Space Mountain if you used today's technology to build Space Mountain. And that's what they built, and it is phenomenal. They pulled out every technology stop they possibly had. So it's a high-speed roller coaster where the cars spin on a horizontal axis in addition to moving forwards and backwards.
Right. So when you're doing a
And
corkscrew, you face the corkscrew while you're going through it.
Right.
It's pretty awesome.
So it's a total trip. So you kind of move, you almost move in three directions, right? You move right, left, up, down, forward, back, and then rotate on an axis, right? Thankfully, I don't get car sick, so I was good. And then they've got like 16 different types of projector that they use to tell the story as you go through it. Yeah. So it's an amazing ride. Super happy. I'm a big Space Mountain fan anyhow. So this was like Space Mountain for a whole new generation, right? I don't think you could come up with a ride that's much more up my alley. And it's Marvel, and I'm nerdy that way, right? Then the next day we did Hollywood Studios, which if you haven't done, has the Star Wars experience crap with it, which I'm a big fan. I'm not a big fan of going into the cantina and spending $50 on 2 drinks in 15 minutes. Like that one was kind of rough for me. You know what I mean? At the same time, it's pretty cool. Right, it's not the Mos Eisley Cantina. It's a newer generation of cantina, but still that same feel. All the drinks are thematic, right? But it's so much an experience that they know they can charge you whatever they want. And you're going to pay it, and they shuffle people through so fast that you really don't get much time. And I don't know how you could afford to spend much time. I mean, 2 ounces of liquid is $25.
Yeah, you didn't build a lightsaber, fortunately.
Well, first off, I couldn't get a reservation, and second, I kind of don't want like my own lightsaber. I prefer someone else's. I have Rey's in the other room,
right?
You know, and I like Obi-Wan Kenobi's, but I'm not sure it's worth $250. Right.
USD.
So let me ask you a question. You learn a lot through the whole process of going through the events, going to the conferences. You guys should write a book on how to go to Disney, but that's a topic for another day.
It changes rapidly. Like I've seen those lists, and it feels like
bringing all that. Corporate actually also need to learn.
Yeah, we're not going to win that. So going through some of the rides, what occurred to me is it's the greatest place in the world to be an audience member, right? But we all work in tech. And the tech that they use at the Disney parks has got to the point where it's absolutely bleeding edge, right? They're using Swarm AI, and they're doing it in a seamless fashion, right? They're using autonomous vehicles with Swarm AI in a way that allows them to be super dynamic and make sure that year over year they can change the ride if they so decide, right? They're no longer using full animatronics on all the creatures. The Minnie and Mickey ride, Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse are just like, they could be big styrofoam heads. They're just big white heads with a big nose, and they project the face on them, which means I can change the video at any time. I'm not stuck into what did I limit that animatronic to specifically, right? I can change the route. I can change what's being projected on the walls. And as a nerd, all that stuff gets me super excited. Right. But then it occurred to me, I don't know that I want to be responsible for the uptime of systems that serve 1 million people a day in something they may only get to do once in their life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it would crush me.
Availability versus performance has higher stakes than random corporate IT job.
Well, even not random corporate IT job, right? But if you think about it, like most people, we're very lucky. Most people get to go to Disney once in their life. Right. I don't want to be responsible for costing that child their once in a life shot at that Mickey ride because it was down. Right. Or the teenage boy who's been a Star Wars fan for their whole life and they couldn't make it on Millennium Falcon because it was broken, because it was down, because it had some issue, because it had some delay. Right. I don't think, like, if I was offered the CIO of Disney job, I think I'd have to pass. I don't think I'd enjoy the quality of life for that job. Like, what do you think, Jeff? Is that?
The incident management piece is interesting, right? So we're accustomed to dealing with incident management related directly to IT, and it's almost different. Okay, some kid drops an ice cream cone, right? The ice cream. How's the park going to respond? How quickly can we get Mickey out on stage in the park to have some sort of intervention there from a customer centricity standpoint? It makes a lot of what we do very physical, very tangible. It's interesting. And I think that's that radical customer centricity just to an extreme. They understand. They've done it forever. I mean, they've done it for so long, and it stretches it starts. And what's also so fascinating to me is the thread across their products, right? It starts in studios, and then it goes to streaming distribution. And then somehow we have to have this incident management also in the parks, and it's this massive thread of how they pull that whole ITP or the whole content through. That's just phenomenal to me. Rapid learning, I think, informing across all three major segments of their business.
So there's to go back into kind of the history of Disney and really talk about that centricity and that attention to detail. Disney did a thing years ago called Party Gras. I don't know if anybody remembers Party Gras, but it was Disney's Disney's version of the Mardi Gras celebration. And so it was their kind of New Orleans themed parade and whatnot. And they launched it on Bourbon Street in New Orleans.
Interesting.
They showed up 6 months before, not just to kind of prep, but they paid people to climb down in the sewer and clean out 300 years of garbage. So that for two reasons. First, so the city didn't smell nasty, but second, so that it rains a lot, and they didn't want any puddles or flooding to occur, and they wanted to make sure that all the sewers worked correctly. Nobody would do that. No other company is showing up 6 months early for a 3-day launch so they can plunge the sewer of a 300-year-old city. But Disney felt that if they didn't do that, the risk to the experience would be something. Yeah, there we go. There's Party Gras. Would be something that they didn't want, their fans to experience and didn't want to be associated with. And I was lucky enough to go to New Orleans for the first time after that, and they were talking about that experience and how much nicer the city was. Right? How much nicer Bourbon Street was. For the first time in anyone's life, the sewers actually worked. Like the drains on the street actually drained water quickly. Right? It didn't continue to smell like vomit and urine on Wednesday when it was deposited on a Saturday. You know what I mean? And nobody does that. Nobody has that level of attention to detail.
Is that something that they learn to do? Or is that something that they just do it and somebody just, let's do it?
There's a article that a friend of mine, Luke Holman, had me read from Harvard Business Review, and it cites Disney, and it's called The Theory of the Firm. And the premise is care less about your competitive differentiation and more about how you're going to grow. And they outline 3 points, and it's really hitting a lot on Disney. The first is foresight about an industry's future, which I would argue is kind of the win. The insight into which capabilities can optimize your future, and the cross sight into what assets can be configured to greater value. And it's phenomenal. Recommend the article. But it's so clear that Disney has done that by able to reuse their assets, their existing assets, and all of these different capabilities together to expand across so many product lines. I don't know of another company that does that quite as clearly. And you see it. You see the same IP, the same assets utilized with their unique capabilities manifesting itself across all their product lines. I mean, the parks are a perfect example of bringing to life studio. And it used to just be you went to a cinema and you just see the movie and that was the thing. Maybe you had a few toys, but here they just used the comment Howard earlier about how Guardians of the Galaxy is just gathering a different set of assets, but even more capabilities they've learned that they're able to apply into this new ride. And the trick there then is the foresight about an industry's future. The bets on Pixar, the bets on Marvel, the bets on Lucas, It's some significant foresight, and the capability to actually acquire those assets is just phenomenal. I don't know of another firm that's been so successful.
But I'm not sure they cared that much about competitive differentiation. Like, they weren't looking at their studio against other studios. They just wanted to build and deliver a good product.
And that's the point in the article,
Right.
is it's less about the competitive differentiation, all about growth, focus on the growth. And so definitely invite our audience to check out the article. It's worth a read, but it's just very interesting. And so kind of going back to Carlos, to your comment about learning, I think it's that you have to have an idea of an industry's future. How's your industry evolving? So you know where you want to rapidly learn to get to. How quickly can we learn to get into that space? And the easy examples are, of course, SpaceX and these other disruptive firms, Tesla. And so I think that's part of it. You have to have the industry foresight, but you also need to know where you excel, where are your capabilities that you're good at, and then what assets do you have that you can push forward.
Is how much of that requires kind of a thorough understanding of your audience, of your customer, of your target consumer might even be a better way to kind of think about it, right? Because I may not, like, if I provide a free service, you're not necessarily my customer, but you would be my target consumer, right? So how much requires a thorough understanding of that to find success?
Significant. I mean, it's got to be a ton, but I would argue Disney knows their customer. I mean, that's one thing, that the fact that you spent that much money, Howard, on a set of drinks and you still walked out with a smile, like that is customer centric. Yeah, you do it again. Maybe not stay for 30 minutes, but
right. But yeah, I mean, there's very little. I tend to be a pretty picky human, truthfully. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff I just don't tolerate, and yet I happily stood in line for 90 minutes to go be treated like a rebel spy on Rise of the Resistance. I did it twice in the same day, as a matter of fact. And I do have to say, so we got a slightly different experience than I think most people get on that ride. So the story of the ride is, you're a rebel spy. You start off on a planet, and you have to go from that planet, take a shuttle, and go to another planet and carry the Death Star plans with you. As soon as you get into space, the New Order shows up with a Death Star, pulls you into a tractor beam, and the door is opened, and now you're on board the loading dock, and you're being interrogated. And so they bring you right out, and there's like 60 stormtroopers.
We need a spoilers tag on this, Carlos. I feel like there's got to be like a proper spoilers warning here.
And you've only described a third of the ride so far.
Yeah. Then they start breaking you up into groups that are going to be interrogated.
Yep.
Right. And my wife at this point has to pee really bad.
Oh,
The whole time we're
left.
walking through the line, she's like, "Oh my God, I hope this is almost done. Oh my God, I hope this is almost done." And so we get to that, and she's like dancing. And I'm like, is it really bad? And she's like, "Yeah." So I call someone over, and they're like, "Do you wish to give us the plans to the Death Star?" She's like, "I have to go to the bathroom. I'll give you anything." Excellent. We've broken you. And they stay in character. And every single other Disney employee that we pass that's in New Order gear, they say, we've got one to talk. They escort us to the bathroom, then they escort us back, and they say, "This one has some interesting things to say. Put them at the front of the line. They're going to need to see an interrogator immediately." You know what I mean? They stayed in character and made just that interruption part of the ride, part of the story, part of the kind of excursion. And it's just a level. I don't see anybody else doing it. I don't see anybody else kind of taking it to that level. But they also so thoroughly understand their customer and thoroughly understand the product that they're selling. The product that they're selling is emergent. The product that they're selling is kind of that fantasy, right? And how do you make that fantasy work with 100,000 people a day? Well, you make it work by doing things like that, by doing small things that have such a big impact.
So I bet, and I don't know this, but I think what they've done there perhaps is decentralized the decision making down to the individuals doing it, to have the power and the authority to focus radically on the customer experience and deviate. I doubt that was pre-designed. I mean, at some point it's become a pattern that they just do. But the very first instance was rapid learning by the person doing the work say, hey, I got a good idea. I got an innovative way to delight this customer that we can learn from and put into place. You know, we've all been on those phone calls to whatever telco company you're trying to cancel your cable from, and it's the complete opposite experience, right? And I think there's something around management encouraging they call it magic, but the magic creation for the guest experience, and decentralizing that to empower its employees to do that. And it's funny because I always think of Disney as a very conservative and constrained and managerial approach company. But I think in this area, you may have experienced something that was radical innovation at a individual level that they've scaled.
Well, but Disney also does that in a very specific way. Every employee that you will interact with at a Disney park is not an employee. They're a member of the cast. And that's a very important distinction. Like, you have to audition. You don't apply. You also have to audition to become a member of the cast. They look at it as an enduring piece of theater. And that's kind of how they approach that. And part of that has to be, okay, someone's going to do something that you don't have a script for, right? Just like you're on stage and somebody skips a line or messes up a line, what do? How do you recover? You can't break. You can't just go, dude, that's not the line. Like, you have an audience in front of you.
Yep.
Right. And I think part of their logic behind you're a member of the cast is you can't break the fantasy, but you have to incorporate the changes that occur. You have to incorporate the little pieces of chaos that show up on a day-to-day basis and continue to maintain the fantasy, and will enable you to do that within the context of your role.
That culture is rare, I think, in a lot of the large organizations we work with. And they've enabled that type of innovation on the fly as needed by putting guardrails around it, loosely coupled architecture, if you will. And it shows up in the culture. It's awesome, radical customer centricity.
Some of that is a misinterpretation of what quality means, right? Mm-hmm. Quality, in some respects, is defined, especially in IT, as consistency. Do the same thing over and over again, and you will have this exact same availability and performance. Whereas that's not true in everything. Like, it's not true in the Jungle Cruise. The Jungle Cruise, they give you a third of the jokes. The rest of the jokes are things that are coming from you, which is why every time you go on the Jungle Cruise, it's a little bit of the same, but it's a lot different every time. Every single skipper. In fact, every time the skipper goes around, they have another set of jokes in their head that they're going to use, right? So it's only because of that do people constantly go on that ride every so often, because they want to experience some new set of jokes that they think is hilarious or not, right? But in IT, in many ways, the goal is that consistency for an assumption that increases the quality, when in fact, that might be true in release management, but it's probably not true in customer engagement, right? It's probably not true in relationship management. It's probably not true in customer journey.
It's
right?
true
Customer
in
journey.
Crew, but it's not true in cast.
Right.
Right. The things you do on the back end that make the lighting work, that move the sets, right, that have to do with making sure that the costume looks the same from show to show, all of those things can be done with a focus on consistency, a focus on repeatability. But the things that are cast, the things where you're interacting with the audience, have to have a level of freedom to them, have to have a level of enablement to them, have to have a level of autonomy to them that say, this is your role and this is how your role should act. Go with God, my son, and make that work. Like, your goal is, the goal of a Disney cast member is to make that the most memorable experience you will have ever until you come back and see us again. And if that's never, if you come one time, this is the story you will tell your children. This is the story they will tell their friends, right? And yet, to Jeff and Paul's point, we don't do that, right? We don't enable the people that do relationship management. We don't enable the embedded technicians, the embedded engineers, the embedded developers to carry that level of customer centricity, customer value, personalization, and autonomy with them, when in fact it makes all the difference in the world. Right? The hardest thing to do is acquire a customer, and yet the second you talk to customer service, it's like they're trying to not make you a customer again. right?
It's true that we don't have this cast and crew differentiation in IT. That is never a topic to be had. It's all about maintaining your standards, right? Red, green, yellow in the projects, or blinking lights in the data center. It's very rarely saying you have a different set of OKRs than you do, right? We all have the same OKRs.
So how do we bring that? How do we bring that concept? Is that something that is even achievable in our world?
Of course it is. Of course it is. But I think it has to do with, like, there's this concept of must be done. These are the projects that I've committed to. They must be completed by the date to which I've said they'll be completed, regardless of anything else. And we see it as a failure every time there's a push. But every time there's a push, there's a real world reason for that push. And they're almost always reasonable, right? It's almost always somebody got sick for 2 weeks. I'm dealing, I'm dealing with a few enduring kind of medical issues from key people in my organization, right? And things push. Well, they push because humans are involved, and we're humans. And yet our failure to maintain that cast and only allow for crew means we never make that personal connection that allows for that forgiveness, that allows for that empathy. Right. So of course, I think it's easy to fix. I think we just say, the goal is customer centricity. And in order to do that, we must be empathetic to what the customer is going through. And thus you must have the autonomy to within some kind of loose boundary, to make the customer satisfied with the service that we promise to provide, and accepting of our limitations in the same way we're accepting of their limitations.
So you can
and
learn
it's more than
to
present.
Crew, but how do you learn to be cast? Like, it's very easy to create a program crew, right? Here are the buckets of things you need to know, and I can test you on the things you need to know. But that's not appropriate for cast. Right? Cast, you're looking for them to engage differently all the time, right? I want you to create a personalized experience. I want you to read the room, right? Read the situation. Treat children differently than you treat adults. Where does that come from? How do you engage in that learning experience?
I think crew, though, still is going to get pulled in to that insight of your industry's future, right? You're going to need to predict your future customer tastes and your future customer demand. And I think that's sometimes gets locked out by crew also. We have this infrastructure, we have this setup, we have this business process, we have this bureaucracy, this old technology that is our debt that's going to limit our ability to act on that future industry direction. And what it sounds like Disney's been successful at is bringing that technology forward. They still have old rides because the customers still love them. People love going on It's a Small World, right? That's a thing. Like, whenever they've tried to stop it, people still do it. Howard hates it.
It's horrible.
But it's still a thing. There's a reason they have it. But at the same time, each iteration of a new ride is taking their newly found capability that crew is standardized, and they radically push it forward. So it may not be the same ride is always radically upgraded, but it is that crew on the next instance, the next iteration on the next ride, is pushing that limit further and further. But what Disney's done is it's that foresight. It's knowing what our customers' taste and demand will be in the future. And that it takes a long time to build a ride. So to getting ahead of that is just phenomenal.
I think Disney also does an incredible job, not only of learning from where they've been, right, which they do as good as anybody else, if not better than everybody, right? I'd say they're one of the top 5 companies. Like, it's very rare that I can click play on an animated feature. And lately, I don't know what Disney produces. I no longer have children that are of that age, right? So I just see something show up. I click play. In 25 seconds before the little Disney splash, I know this is a Disney, because somehow it just has that feel. It has that look. It has that Disneyfication to it. And they do the same thing in their rides. And as they continue to evolve, and as they continue to change, and as they continue to update them and remove the things that are maybe no longer palatable or no longer acceptable or no longer, not, it's not appropriate that I'm looking for, but relevant. They still know what they can take away and what they can't take away, right? The Jungle Cruise has changed a lot in recent years. And yet, yeah, I kind of miss, the nostalgia of the old ride, but they haven't removed the heart of the old ride that I love. Like, they're still smart enough to go, these are the things that are important and we'll fight for those, but these are the things that we also have to fight to change, and we're okay with that. And it's this level of kind of constant improvement and constant evolution and constant learning that I think most companies miss and lose, right? I would never describe Disney as a calcified company, and yet it's a term that I use over and over and over again for various, companies. Is they're calcified. They don't innovate anymore. They don't learn. They continue to do the same thing over and over again, and in many ways expect a different result.
And you see it across their products. It's not just the parks, it's the studios. Right. If you get the chance, I would invite folks to Google the stagecraft that Mandalorian has been shot on, and the technology that's evolved so rapidly of being in front of just a green screen essentially, but they can project the scenes behind the actors, so the actors aren't just green wearing suits with in front of green and not knowing what they're doing or what the characters. They can actually put them in the scene, make you feel like you are acting on a planet with a screen behind you. That is yet more areas where I think crew is constantly pushing the barrier, the debt against the debt, to advance it so cast can act appropriately. They're able to weaponize their capabilities in just phenomenal ways.
So thinking about that, then can we take a page from that? It looked like we need both worlds. We need to have crew that could keep doing probably the repeatable process. In a sense, they're also the ones that may innovate because they have to do it for the repeatable. But we need to then develop some cast members, some people that will delight the customer, that will, like you said, if the customer is coming with this face, or if it's a customer in this area, that they can react in a different way. Is that more on the sales side when they're starting the process? Is that more on the operation when they're supporting them? What do you think?
Well, I think it's always on the sales side, but I think every interaction with a customer is the sales side, and I think that's part of what we've lost, right? Every opportunity that you have to talk to a customer, whether they're happy or sad, is an opportunity to sell a customer, right? And I think you kind of need to. I think we need to kind of go back to remembering that, right? Today, companies are spending billions of dollars on digital transformation. All digital transformation is finding your customer and working to retain them as they evolve and change, right? Digital transformation is changing your company to deliver your products in the way your customers wish they could receive them. Every company that's been displaced or disrupted has done so because they failed to do that. They failed to recognize they're not achieving what the customer wants, where they want, and when they want it, and how they want it, and someone else comes in that does. But if we're going to spend billions of dollars to do that, and we miss out on the fact that once we have the customer, they're far easier to retain than they were to get in the first place, and we've removed all autonomy from every customer-facing role and continue to do so, then we're going to spend billions of dollars to ultimately end up in exactly the same place that we started.
That being said, Disney has not perfected their contact center software. I don't know if anybody's called them recently. It is still a train of ones and zeros and clicking buttons, and it's before you get to actual summon human, they haven't perfected that technology yet. So even though that is a sales opportunity, I bet there's a lot of drop calls.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I was very, very upset going into the park, going into Epcot, not being able to have joined the 7:30 virtual queue because I set an alarm. I woke up. Right. I logged in or 7 o'clock. I logged in exactly on time, only to be told that for some reason I didn't qualify for that queue. If I didn't qualify for the queue, you could have told me before. You could have said you only qualify for the 1 o'clock queue. You could have set an expectation because you control the digital data. And then you probably should have told me why I didn't qualify. Right? Why members of my party, which was my wife and myself, didn't qualify for the early virtual queue. Those things probably would have been useful. They are far from perfect, as much as we are fans of Disney on this podcast.
You were not as important as a customer as somebody else. They just didn't want to say that in words. You, my friend, are B level.
I mean, Disney's a big company. I'm okay being a B-level Disney customer. That's actually not a bad place for me to be.
You know, it'll be interesting if, because they know that you guys have gone so much, they know that you're a repeatable customer, that you will continue to come, and they give priority to the customers that actually this is only their first time.
That would be hilarious. As in, we're on a list where Disney says we know we can shit on them and they'll still be back.
Yep.
Like I love the idea that Disney maintains such a list.
Definitely a topic for another pod, but it is interesting that they are the only major customer-centric organization that doesn't have a loyalty program.
Yeah.
Right? None at all. At all. You have no idea. There's no point accumulation. There's no obvious recognition of past stays. None of that's true.
And customers are quite loyal.
Even though we know they have that data, obviously. But it's never a recognized issue.
Well, I think that it was really interesting to understand that difference. There will always be the team that is the crew that is maintaining everything working, making sure that the rights, in our case, may be the solutions, the product that we sell or support. But there need to be that other team that is like a cast member that could delight the customer so they can continue to come back, that they will say that they will pay $50 for the drink without complaining, and they will go back again. So my friends, take the time to write down your note, share with your team. As always, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on our next episode.